Ciao si, which is, of course, Mandarin for Achtung, Achtung. After our Operation Market Garden extravaganza, James and I have returned to Blighty with Dutch hangovers. Actually, I had a very odd day the day after the day I got back. I didn't feel right. I think it was the 8% beer I was drinking with John in the Para Bar late at night.
You have my sympathy. You have my sympathy.
I'm amazed I do. Oh, crikey. Anyway, Dutch hangovers and some cracking memories from Arnhem and Nijmegen. And actually, if you've heard James's rendition of our current sponsor's message, you'll get a good sense of how much he enjoyed his evening in the Blue Hand pub in Nijmegen. Now, that's what I call taking your job seriously, James.
Oh, dear me. It was
a one-man victory lap.
Yeah. It was one of those moments where 1 minute I was fine and the next minute I was having to read that out, and I absolutely wasn't. It crept up on me, but very quickly.
Right, well, a big thank you to all of our listeners. Record numbers of you joined us during our 9 days of Market Garden. And I have to say, I mean, I enjoyed the whole thing enormously, and it was great. But the highlight for me was being on the bridge and you coming up those steps and you not having been there before. Because, you know, we've been doing this for quite a while now, and you're always the expert. And finally, I got my moment to go. That was over there, and that was over there. I win.
Yeah, no, I was the pupil. You were my teacher. So yeah, it was fantastic. My wife has been criticising me for saying absolutely amazing too often, but it was absolutely amazing. I mean, it really was absolutely amazing. I completely loved it. I thought the whole thing was just utterly fascinating from start to finish.
Yeah.
And it was amazing, wasn't it? How it really was amazing. How well commemorated and supported it was over there, in sharp contrast to over here in the UK. Yeah,
there wasn't much about it. There was the sort of page 7 articles in the papers, wasn't there? Features,
yep.
With but not a lot of TV coverage. And
I didn't see any TV coverage at all.
Well, I don't know. Was there there may have been something on the news on Saturday about the drop that they did on Saturday, but I don't know. I just sort of maybe it's me. Maybe it's because I grew up on Market Garden. If it's not on the news around the 17th. I think there's something gone wrong, but it did seem odd. I mean, perhaps what we've had is that D-Day was all the D-Day coverage, of which there was masses, and which you know you're a big feature of, and that was absolutely amazing. That maybe telly has gone. All right, that's it. That's all right. We've done World War II now. We had to have Trump come over, and French presidents and. Prelates and celebs and plays on the telly and fly pasts and all that sort of thing. And perhaps they kind of think, well, we've done it now. It's over. World War II has officially ended.
And maybe from the BBC's point of view, they're so pumped up for the start of World on Fire that they're kind of trying to keep their powder dry. Who knows?
Yeah, perhaps. I mean, I don't know. That would involve a calculation where one end of the BBC knew what the other end of the BBC was up to.
That's true. That's obviously not going to happen, is it? Yeah, no, it's interesting because actually my wife Rachel, not only did she take me up on the point of saying absolutely amazing every 2 minutes, she was the one who said, and she's not really interested in the Second World War at all, but she said it's absolutely disgraceful how little there has been on the media about this, and she was the one who pointed it out to me, actually. Well,
it did seem peculiar. I mean, the main thing for me, though, as you say, is how well commemorated it is in Arnhem itself. And you see those maroon flags with the Pegasus on absolutely everywhere, sort of basically every other house. And the signs in shops saying veterans welcome, and very much a sense of the occasion of it and all that sort of thing in the town. But for me, the highlight for me was standing at the end of the road where Urquhart was trapped in the house, right by the St Elizabeth Hospital. And you look to the left and there's a railway line, and it's a busy railway line, so there's always a train going through. So you're reminded it's there. And you look down to the right, like another 150 metres, and there's the river. And that's why Market Garden failed. That bottleneck. Yep. And you can drop as close or as far as you want, but if you've got a bottleneck, well, apart from General Gavin, that's why the British component of Market Garden failed. We'll get to General Gavin in a minute. I've just been handed a piece of paper that says Gavin exclamation mark. We'll get to that in a minute. That's why they had such trouble.
And it's a really, really small piece of real estate, isn't it? It really is.
Tiny,
and there's nothing like a railway line, a little raised railway line where someone to rest your MG42 to give you a really fantastic bit of cover, but also a field of fire. And also, that field of fire goes down the street. You're looking down on it. I mean, from a machine gunner's point of view, you've got that whole area covered.
Yeah. And that housing estate, to get to that point, is a grid. So they're being enfiladed all the way down to the end, where
they're advancing across the their axis of advance is at 90 degrees to the fire from the railway line.
Yeah.
So that's just
and then there's the hospital, which is obviously a neutral space. So what do you do that? Well, if you try and run up one side of the hospital, you're alongside the railway line, and if you try and run up the other side of the hospital, you're in the area without any cover. And until you get to the museum, on the just before you get to the museum, on the right hand side of that road, of the upper Utrechtweg. So the whole thing, the thing I really took, I mean, I've been there several times before, but the real value of standing on the ground and looking at the place and actually being able to size up the place right there in front of you and go, right, well, this is why on day one it was a problem, and on day two it was worse, and on day three, on the Tuesday, it was an absolute disaster, because if the Germans have effectively blocked that, there is absolutely no way to get to the bridge. And at what point do you, as one of those battalion commanders, actually go, you know what, we're never going to get through. Let's make the best of our job and go back to Oosterbeek, go back to the, or form a perimeter somewhere, because after all, the perimeter that they arrive at is sort of one of last resort rather than any brilliantly chosen position. So I mean, just standing there and seeing the ground, and very much sort of. And also, Urquhart was right there at the front of where the problem was, in that loft, obviously thinking...
stone's throw from the hospital.
Yeah, what the hell's going on? Literally over the road.
And actually, that house he was in was literally halfway between the railway line
and the river.
Yeah.
Absolutely amazing. It's nuts.
But it is. I think one of those interesting things of walking the ground is that you get... It's always kind of, it's familiar because you've looked at enough maps and enough black and white photographs or whatever. So you sort of go, okay, yeah, right. Yeah. Okay, that's that bit there. But at the same time, it's unfamiliar as well. It always surprises you. And the thing that you don't get from looking at a map or looking from a black and white photograph, you don't really get that sense of scale.
No.
And it's only when you are in the actual place where these events took place and standing on that bit of ground that you suddenly go, oh, I get it. I understand now. And, we were talking about Mark Clark the other day and Rome and turning on to Rome. My Damascene moment on that was when I was standing where 5th Corps would have broken out of the Anzio beachhead. And I was looking up to the Auburn Hills and I was thinking, Jesus, I wouldn't want to be in a force kind of going across, because that's exactly the same problem. Your axis of advance is 90 degrees against the German 14th Army are all on the top of that hill. And that's what prompted me to kind of investigate all this and go, hang on a minute, was it really such a bad idea after all, and was it a dodgy decision? And, obviously I concluded not. But it really does make a difference being there. It really does.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing that, when you turned up at the bridge, the other thing is how tiny that space is, how small the lodgement they had on the bridge was, and how brutal that must have been, that everyone on top of each other, and how close the fighting must have had to been. And
well, my favourite moment of that bit was you said that's where that really famous photograph was taken, and I had that absolutely imprinted on my mind, and it was like, yes, that is it, that's the spot. And there is something profoundly moving about. That's why I love those then and now shots. The black and white photo of them marrying up and going, crikey, I'm on this exact same spot. There's something very there's emotional connection then that you don't have from reading a book or.
Yeah, it's no longer arrows on a map. It's people.
No, it's real. It's real.
Now, the thing we just touched it a moment ago. The business of the bridge at Nijmegen and General Gavin. The podcast you did with RG with Rob Pullison, I thought was fascinating.
Yeah,
it's one of the few ones with you.
He's a lovely fellow
that I actually bothered listening to, and I didn't get into this to listen to you, James.
No,
it's the sound of my own voice that matters. Anyway, that I thought that was really interesting, and that he has obviously been right down to the very the right into the documents and right into the written record and right into the orders and right into to find out actually what went on. And what went on is there was no effort to take the bridge, and then he says, of course, there was a possibility on the night of the 19th when 30 Corps arrived, and that wasn't taken either.
Yeah, I mean, I've always been a bit of a fan of Jim Gavin. I mean, he was pretty cool-headed in Sicily. He was amazing at Lafayette and everything on the Murder on the D-Day drop. And, he's a pretty cool guy. I mean, youngest general in the US Army, kind of worked his way up from nothing and all the rest of it. And as you know, I've got a bit of a thing about the Sherman Rangers Yeomanry. And I was, some years ago, editing Stanley Christopherson's diaries, who was the CEO of the Sherwood Rangers. And he was working in tandem with Jim Gavin at Eindhoven and had nothing but praise for him. Said he was an absolute top bloke and all the rest of it. So I've always been very kind of well disposed towards him. But you're right. And also the other thing is someone like RG. I mean, it's interesting how there's so much kind of sort of rolling of stones, that the same old line just gets repeated over and over and again. So a historian comes along and they've sort of found a bit more about some letters from someone who was there and a few more eyewitness testimonies, and they've got a slightly different take on pattern or something like that. But basically, there's a whole lot of assumed knowledge that just gets rolls over into the next book, the next TV program, all the rest of it. And actually, sometimes it takes one person to just go, hang on a minute, that doesn't make any sense to me. I'm going to investigate this a little bit harder and look into it. And his research is as valid as anybody's.
Well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, Gavin, of course, broke 2 discs landing at Nijmegen, so maybe he was off his tits.
Maybe
the other
that's
thing,
it. I mean,
the
he
other
might
thing,
have just been.
Well, then the other thing is Gavin then goes on to be... who's that calling, James? Is that that's the Gavin family, is it?
Probably is, yeah. Come to crucify me.
The Gavinist, their estate.
Yeah,
you alleged our much honoured client was under the influence of morphia drugs when making it.
I want you to know, sir, we're going to sue you. Okay, sorry.
Sorry, old boy.
Don't sue me, sue R.G. Poulison. But
anyway,
I mean,
it is the Arnhem elephant in the room is the Nijmegen Bridge, no doubt about it.
Yep,
and it never comes up. It's the radios, or it's the Panzer SS. So we get people going, there's a Panzer SS at the bridge. That's what there was, and the radios didn't work, and they dropped too far away. And no, they didn't take Nijmegen Bridge.
Well, it's amazing how many tweets that people come in and said, as far as I'm concerned, it's all Monty's fault. He was arrogant and hubristic.
Yeah.
Full stop.
Yeah. It was the Panzer SS.
But actually, it turns out it wasn't. It was all down to Jim Gavin.
It's Jim Gavin. Well, there we go.
Whether he was on morphine, whether he wasn't, who knows? But it was his fault.
Just don't mention that again. Right, okay. So that's Market Garden done for now.
Yes.
Although it's a bulging suitcase, and I'm sure it will pop open from time to time.
Well, I think so.
Well, yeah. One of the things that's been really brilliant about this series of podcasts for Market Garden is how much
interaction we've had with our virtual audience.
It's been quite fantastic to have people get so involved and enjoy it. Because I thought it was quite nice to get our teeth into something properly.
Really good, and it's made me want to learn a bit more. I've got to say, which I need to very quickly.
Yeah, you do.
I'm not having you trump me again. I tell you.
Yeah. Right, well, we will be producing more special editions of the podcast as and when James and I fancy a boozy few days on the continent. Talking of which, an email from Leon Hornsby. Dear heads of the Escape Committee, I think I'm Big X. Great podcast, but my wife thinks that it's having too big an effect on my life. Following recent podcasts, I had a revelation. I researched the route James mentioned was used to escape from Spain to France. I believe he was referring to the Chemin de Liberté. My friends and I purchased a copy of Escape from Colditz and drove to Saint-Giron, the south of France, to have a game, and then we walked to freedom in Spain. It was harder than we thought. Please see attached pictures and videos. We didn't take any photos of the crashed Halifax. Sorry, we were all a bit hypothermic at that point and couldn't keep the camera still. Have you any other great holiday suggestions? Well, yeah.
Yeah, where do you start?
Well, yeah, if you want to walk the ground, there's no better way of doing it. I mean, I've always thought you get the ferry from Portsmouth to Ouistreham.
Yep.
And you come in and there's the...
Pegasus Bridge just down the road.
Pegasus Bridge just down the road. There's the D-Day landing beaches, the British end. It's
don't miss the bridges over the River Deve. They're always good.
Yeah, it's all there.
Yep.
And you only have to drive 20 miles south, and you start to get into kind of Falaise country and all that sort of thing. Yeah. And there it all is.
And then if you really fancy it, go to Egypt. I mean, it's not the best place in the world right now, but Alameин's a fantastic place to go and visit. Tunisia, that's really good. Lots there. If you're feeling adventurous. But otherwise, I mean, think about the Mediterranean. I mean, Sicily, Crete, Leros, Simi, Rhodes.
I mean, you can sit and drink a coffee overlooking many prominent Italian battlefields and feel like you're on holiday as well as
Italy. Well, I'm off to Italy Thursday morning. Going to have a look at the Gothic line. Montisoli, actually, I'm going to Montisoli. You remember I was telling you about that massacre that happened? Yeah. Yep, up there. Yeah. So I mean, apart from that, it's always a bit of a downer. But I've got to say, you can't fault it for beauty. It's absolutely amazing.
But then also you could go to Berlin. I mean, I bet Berlin is one of my. Now I'm about to sound like a complete London media wanker. Berlin's easily my favourite city break, James. Right? It's such a great city break. I don't know if you like city breaks. It's such a great city break because you can be there pretty quickly.
Yep.
And then the Reich Chancellery's over here, and the Brandenburg Gate's over there, and the Adlon, famously where they took all those phone calls on the switchboard, is over there, and then you can walk down the Tiergarten to where the Flakturm was, and it's right there.
And the block.
Yeah, the whole thing. And again, a very nice, refreshing drinks in the evening in Berlin.
Yes.
But I would really recommend going there. It's a fantastic place to visit.
And of course, you can go to the Eagle's Nest and Berchtesgaden.
Yeah.
Go stay in the hotel where Goering's house was.
I think Leon was saying his wife wasn't keen on this, but there you go. Hey, honey.
That's why you need to go to Italy.
Yeah.
You can even go to the lovely Val d'Orcia. Val d'Orcia in southern Tuscany. Absolutely beautiful. One of the most lovely
Crete.
places. Yeah, but the Val d'Orcia, just to go back to Val d'Orcia, that's where Iris Arrigo lived, a place called La Foce, and you can go and visit it. And it's amazing, beautiful landscape gardens by a British designer, done in the 1920s, and she kept this wartime diary, and she looked after all these partisans and children that had been evacuated from Turin and Milan, and they had to do this march because the Hermann Goering division turned up and booted them out, and they had to go to Montepulciano and do this trek down from their house up to the nearby town, and it's all in the diary, and it's amazing, and you can walk the walk and you can see the sights.
Wow.
And it's all fantastic, and it's just beautiful, and amazing wine, amazing food. It's just a great place to visit, and his wife will be really happy.
Okay, well there we go. There you go, Leon.
That's where
right.
I want to go.
Okay, now Leon also asks a question. Was General Gort a World War I general fighting a World War II battle, or a great bloke let down by his allies?
Well, he certainly wasn't a World War I general fighting a World War II battle.
No, because not
at all.
Not at all.
Because actually
he was a chap, wasn't he? He was a chap. He'd won a Victoria Cross, hadn't he?
And he was Lord Gort.
Super brave and mega army establishment. So
also,
probably
he was also Field Marshal by then as well.
Yeah, so he probably gives this vibe of being like old army.
Yeah.
So rather than some of the more modernising generals, who basically what happens is the old army lose the Second World War, part one of the Second World War, and then the new army elbow their way through and go, actually, I think we're going to run this now. Thanks very much, and get into Churchill's ear and say, to be honest, we've been paying attention. We all went to staff college. We're basically the same two or three cadres.
Yep.
We all know each other,
Yeah.
and they elbow their way through and take over.
Yeah.
It's kind of what happens. So Gort, you could characterise as, riding boots and
Gort was Chief of the Imperial General Staff before,
Yeah.
and he steps down to take command of the BEF, the British Expeditionary Force, in France when they head over in the autumn of 1939. And then afterwards, obviously, someone else has already taken that position of Chief of the Imperial General Staff. So he can't be Chief of the General Staff again, which is, after all, the top job in the army, really. And then he's kind of sort of wandering around in the wilderness for a little bit before he then becomes governor of Malta. In May 1942 and gets sent over there. And actually, it's a really good call setting him there because Malta's been covered by a bunch of kind of B-listers, really. And suddenly he's A-list. He's someone who's got a VC. He's Field Marshal Viscount Gort, VC. And that's a very impressive. It sends out a big message to Maltese. But I think and is he let down by his allies in France? Well, yes. And I do think the French have a lot to answer for in 1940. But that's because they're doing the lion's share of the land fighting. But I think where Gort doesn't push far enough is on the communications level. You know, they're a bit slow as well, instinctively. So the whole point about with the Germans in 1940 is they can move really quickly, is, though, whereas none of the Allies can move fast. And it's not just the French who don't move fast. The British don't move fast either. You know, when on the 10th of May, they're moving up from the French border to the River Dyle, which is in Belgium. Yeah. And, you know, they don't get, you know, the alarm has happened at kind of in the early hours of the 10th of May, and they don't move till kind of lunchtime. You know, it's a bit like...
Yeah, but what we're talking about here, though, is if the question is, was he a World War I general fighting World War II battle? We have to say no.
Yeah.
No, because after all, I think what he means by a World War I general is a fellow in a chateau with a static line, not thinking three-dimensionally, not using combined operations. So your artillery is plugged into your infantry, which is plugged into your armour, which is plugged into everything else, and you're trying to fight a war and manoeuvre. That's exactly what the British were trying to do at the start of the Second World War. That was, in fact, the lesson they had digested. And although the army's portrayed as hidebound and ill-equipped, it was pretty well equipped. It was fully mechanised.
The only fully mechanised army in the world.
And this British philosophy that we've talked about before, that the machine does the metal take do the
still
effort.
Not flesh.
So still not flesh. So what you do is you build you build tanks, you build trucks, and you build kit, and that's the thing that does the work, rather than having, you know, just riflemen, which is predominantly what the German army's made up of, and what predominantly the French army's made up of. So he's not trying to fight a World War I style battle at all. He's trying to fight a lessons learned of World War I. We won't let that happen again, because everything the British do is designed to not repeat the First World War. Absolutely everything.
Absolutely.
And that includes, that's politically. So appeasement is about not getting yourself in a 750,000 war dead situation, or a million war dead situation, and then the way you order strategic bombers in the mid-30s is to do with that, and the area bombing campaign that follows. It's all to do with not meeting the Germans in the same way on the front line that you met them.
Absolutely. And what you see in 1939 and 1940 is you see the British Armed Forces, they've already worked out their strategy, and that strategy doesn't change at all in the Second World War. They've worked out they've worked out the principles, but they haven't worked out the process. So what they've said is, okay, we're not going to have a big army. It doesn't matter what happened. We're never going to have an army of millions, field army of millions again. We're never going to have that, because the bigger the army, the more casualties you take. It's just the way it is. So we're going to really limit the size of our army quite deliberately. We're going to go big on naval power. We're going to go really big on air power, and that's still growing, obviously, in 1940. But the army that we do have, we're going to have them completely mechanised. We're not going to have people foot slogging. We're not going to be using mules and horses again. You know, we're going to be fully mechanised. We're going to get steel, not flesh, do the hard yards. But that methodology, that strategy, hasn't been tested in the field until 1940 in the Blitzkrieg. And suddenly, what they realise is actually there's a few things that actually they haven't got right. So they haven't worked out comms. They haven't got enough radios. They haven't worked out that actually they need to get a shift on, that they need to operate faster. The other thing they haven't worked out is how to maintain themselves in the field. So all their base camps are all still back in England. And actually 1st Armoured Division needs to have its maintenance units over in France. And that is a mistake that they never make ever again. They really do learn the lessons very quickly. And
the Germans, meanwhile, are fighting with steel and flesh. That they don't care about their butcher's bill, and the
not so much.
Not so much. And the interesting thing about Blitzkrieg is actually how costly it is for the Germans in 1940.
Well, in terms of machinery, and definitely, and in terms of aircraft.
Well, an awful lot. What is it? 27,000 dead, and then
something like that.
At least 100,000 injured, something like that. So it's like a lot. That's a whole chunk of people. And then, of course, when the next year when they turn the thing on Russia, the cost goes through the roof.
Well,
because they're not fighting like that.
By October 19, I think it's the end of October, certainly by November 1941, they've run out of manpower. You know, they are having to change the rules. That doesn't happen to Britain until summer of 1944.
Yeah. Okay, so General Gort was not a World War One fighting a general fighting World War Two battle. We have concluded, and he was probably a nice enough chap, and he was definitely let down by his allies. But also, if we're honest, no, you let yourself down, you let your school down, you let your family down. No, but to an extent, the fact that the British and the French didn't figure out how to talk to each other, and didn't figure out how to coordinate their campaigns, and didn't actually figure out what they both wanted in the end. It's like the starter's pistol is fired on May the 10th, and then they're both kind of on their own, and looking over each other's shoulder, over their shoulder at the other, going, "Oh shit, the French have vanished on our right flank. What do we do now?" And rather than any kind of coordinated thing, and that's as much the fault of the British as it is of the French. You know, there is a sort of institutional and political failure to stick those two things together, which is immediately the moment we start working the Americans, a thing that we set about solving massively.
Yes, but one of the big problems is that there's so much political disharmony within France that the military only works well when there's political unity at the top, unity of purpose. And the big problem that the French have right from the word go, and this stymies absolutely everything, and it just means that they're semi-paralysed, is that there is no, there's such a big political coalition. This is not the Lib Dems and the Tories. This is like a coalition of something like 11 different parties, from kind of right wingers to communists almost. I mean, it's not quite as bad as that, but I mean, it just means that no one can ever agree anything. And you see in these opening months of the war, the decision making or lack of decision making about Norway, which Churchill first puts forward in September 1939. No decision is made till April. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. Do we bomb the Rhine barges? No, because we might get a bit scared about that. Some French are saying we should do. Some French are saying they can't. They can't agree themselves. So the kind of political kind of thought process, the political authority doesn't seep down to the highest levels of the command, and so everyone's they're kind of sort of making it up as they go along, and just not enough stuff is thought through, and that's why they get in such a pickle.
Well, right then, it's time for a short break. When we return, we'll be in Berlin and Paris, but not literally. Well, welcome back to We Have Ways of Making You Talk with me, Al Murray, and historian James Holland. There you go, James. I gave you your adjective.
I know, but you're getting more and more historian now, especially after Market Garden.
If you did miss our coverage of Operation Market Garden, it's all still available wherever you get your podcasts, and you can pretty much listen to it in any order if you want. But we did take some time to think about what order to put them out in, didn't we? We did at one point. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
A little bit.
Now then, your questions. I want to start with a counterfactual. I mean, I know we say we don't do what ifs, but anyway. This is Martin Sheridan from Dublin, who got in touch to say, and I was in Dublin last week, a whale of a time. Love the pod. My question is, if the Allies had not got as far east after D-Day and were held up by the Germans as winter and then spring set in, would the Russians have kept going west after they reached Berlin? And if so, how far west would they have got before there was Allied intervention? Would they have dared strike for Paris? I don't think so. I mean, let's say the Allies grind to a halt after Market Garden. That they're that they're done at this point. Let's take that as our arbitrary halt point. Autumn closes in. Supply lines are too long. Ike decides that what we're going to do is we're going to sort that out. Rather than keep rolling forward, sort that out, sort out the port, sort out the supply, and then a massive push come the spring. So let's say they've taken. I think the Russians would have probably. I don't know, because you just don't know.
But wouldn't the Russians keep fighting while the Germans would keep fighting? If there's Germans to fight, they'd keep fighting them, wouldn't they?
I suppose.
But there would be lots of. But on the other hand, they went on hold, didn't they, outside Warsaw?
Yep.
The previous year. I mean, I know Stalin was getting increasingly pissed off that that he felt the Allies weren't pulling their weight. They were having to kind of sacrifice all that. So and also the further they go, the more their length of their
supply lines are. I mean, am I not right in thinking though they were starting basically to run out of manpower by the end of by the summer of 1945? That they were pretty much running short, beginning to run out of people, and that they didn't have infinitely deep pockets, and that let's say because let's say our Western allies aren't fighting their share of the Germans, and that those Germans can now redirect and fight the Russians. I'm assuming that's what he's saying, because held up implies some sort of static front line, doesn't it? I don't know. I just sort of think the Russians would have kept going until they destroyed Germany. I don't know if they'd have had any particular interest in France. Didn't fall into their traditional sphere of influence and all that.
No, I don't think so. I don't think they were interested in that at all. I think that's the interesting thing, because I think the French communists thought they might be, but they weren't.
Yeah. Although I remember Dennis Healy talking, reading his diaries, I think, and him saying, or a biography, and him in 1940,
Italy, wasn't he?
Yeah, exactly. And then, goes into the Labour Party, goes to the Labour Party conference, I think, in battle dress that year in 45 after the war. And I think he talks about how if the Russians had boots, that's all they'd need to get. All the Russians need to get to the Channel is boots. We are done. We're on our uppers. We're broke. Any willingness to fight has gone. And that's all the Russians need is boots to get to the Channel. And I seem to remember that as a sort of sentiment that was flying around among some, smart people in 1945. I don't know. It's
interesting, though, but that's very much the view of the kind of sort of the junior officer.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think you get that quite so much at the higher levels.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's such an interesting one, isn't it?
But
what is the motivation of the Russians?
Well, it depends what the Russians are doing. Are they on a war? Are they embarking in a war of kind of self-defense and sphere of influence, or are they in a war of conquest and a war of invasion? And I suppose if you're Polish, they're involved in a war of invasion. Yeah. And if you're German,
it's really influence, isn't it? I mean, it's really influence. I mean, the other thing is I think they were getting low on manpower by the time Berlin falls.
Yeah,
and the point is they put so much effort into taking Berlin quickly. I mean, Stalin saying to Eisenhower, "Oh no, we're not really interested in Berlin. That's not what we want to do." But really planning this massive operation, and the Russians lose literally just gargantuan numbers of men.
Yeah.
In that final battle of Berlin, I think it's something like casualties of 800,000 people.
Yeah.
I mean, it's double the amount of people that Britain loses in the entire war.
Yeah, it's an army of 3 million, isn't it? That they or two armies pincering in vast amounts.
But their casualties are just horrific. I mean,
that is the Germans fighting to the last round generally. But
it's also because of the race between Konev and Zhukov and the pride and the kind of sort of divide and rule sort of tactics that Stalin goes in for, and the pressure that's put on them to get on with it quickly and to get there before the Allies do. Yeah, that's something that Stalin is sort of taking up. Yeah,
profligacy with life.
Yeah, totally. I mean, they're
a shorter tail it's a much shorter tail as well, isn't it? So more of those 3 million men are fighting. Yeah.
So
okay, so we don't know.
Haven't a clue.
No idea.
But it's an
mate.
Interesting one.
Now we have a question. From Matt Bragg. Do you want to read this one, James?
Yeah, it's a nice one, actually. What are the best small museums to visit up and down the country that people wouldn't have necessarily heard of? And I actually remember you went to one quite recently, didn't you?
Yes, I was in Carlisle.
That's right.
In the spring, gigging. Well, I wasn't gigging in Carlisle. I had a gig in Motherwell and a gig in Ulverston. It felt like Carlisle was sort of the best place to commute from. And so I had a Sunday to kill in Carlisle. And, the Border Regiment Museum is there in the castle, in Carlisle Castle, and it's really good. They've all the sort of pipes and drums and standards of the old regiments as they evolve and then get named, and then the locality settles down, all that sort of thing. And then, of course, the Border Regiment were at Arnhem, so there's some stuff about that. And then upstairs at the museum, and I had a long chat with one of the curators, and he gave me a book about the Border Regiment in the war, which is very, very interesting, because they wear a glider patch still, and people assume it's from Arnhem, and it's from Sicily, where they all got dropped in the Mediterranean. Anyway, the upstairs at that museum, they had a really great display about Afghanistan, with guys talking about being in Afghanistan, really, really excellently curated. So they'd have just the stuff that was in someone's pack. So, Rolos, and then breath freshener, and then a letter, and his dressing, field dressing, and all this sort of stuff, just to show the sort of kind of from the bottom up, the soldiers' experience. It was really, really, really good. And the curator in there was saying, we have lots of old guys come through and they listen to these young guys talk about Afghanistan, and it's the same. Although the location might be different, the ostensible cause might be different, but the men's experience is essentially the same. Their experience of combat, their experience of companionship, what they're actually fighting for. Aside, once they've had the lecture from the education officer about what they're fighting for, what they're actually fighting for, and all that sort of stuff. And it was fascinating. And the other one I'd recommend is the Soldiers of Oxford Museum, the Sopho Museum in Woodstock, outside Oxford, near Blenheim. And it's this tiny little museum run by... My dad was involved in volunteering there, so that's why it's just sprung to mind, because the bollocking I would have got if I'd not mentioned it. But it's a very charming museum, and their thing is... it's Civil War right through, so it's soldiers from Oxfordshire, so they're not focused on any one conflict in particular, and it's really, really good. And their archive is magic. They let me poke around the archive one evening, which was incredible. And we did a thing there a while ago about Arnhem, where we showed There It Is the Glory. There was an old para there, and I was sort of talking about the history that had been written. I talked about Robert J. Kershaw's book, It Never Snows in September, right? Yep. Famous book if you're familiar with the history of Arnhem. And that bloke goes, that book was written by a German. I said, it wasn't. It was written by a guy called Robert J. Kershaw. No, it was written by a German. And his daughter goes, you never argue with a man from the parachute regiment who was at the bridge at Arnhem. All right. Well, I won't then.
Actually, he lives in Salisbury. He lives just down the road from me. He does. He lives in Salisbury. Bob Kershaw. He's a nice fellow, actually. He's a very nice guy. I've got a couple. So there's a lovely one at Manston. Lovely little museum, sort of Battle of Britain, aviation museum, all sorts of stuff, Spitfires there, etc., and lots. It's just really done with a lot of passion and love and care, and that's really nice. There's also, there's so many of those sort of bomber airfields, old bomber airfields in East Anglia and stuff. There's a lovely one at Ridgewell, which is where the 381st Bomb Group were, and they've just got they've got a Nissan hut and it's got stuff in it and artifacts and bits and pieces and bits of old plane, but again they've just done it really, really nicely, and it's done by people who just really love it. There's a sort of collection rather than a museum, is the Weald Foundation, run by this amazing guy called Mike Gibb, I've told you about, and it's got this. It's just in Kent near Tunbridge, I think it is, or Maidstone, something like that, and he's got this absolutely astonishing collection of working German vehicles.
He's got a Panther, hasn't he?
Jagdpanther. He's got a Jagdpanther, 2 Stugs, half track, all sorts of stuff, prime movers, the whole work. They all work. So I suppose it sort of is a museum, but it isn't a museum. But I think you can go there and go and look at it, and they run them up from time to time. In fact, we should go there. We really should go there.
In fact, let's agree. We're going. Let's do it. We'll do it. Now we have one more. We've got time for one more question. Benjamin Thomas Scott says, I'm a massive fan of the podcast and have won countless arguments with my brother because of James. I know not because of me, though. Okay. Thanks, Benjamin. How easy, this is a good question, how easy was it to avoid conscription during World War II in the UK? We believe a relative in the family may have achieved this by swapping his first and middle names and telling people a different date of birth. It's been a family mystery for a while, but we've just found out his birth certificate, and discovering the truth. What do we know? What do we know about this, James?
I don't think it was terribly easy to avoid, actually. I think you not without help. You needed someone to kind of, a medical officer to kind of go, oh no, he's definitely got a dodgy chest. All that kind of thing, so you needed to kind of slip a bung to a doctor, but most doctors wouldn't do this, but some did. Of course, one of the ways of avoiding conscription was to have a reserved occupation. You could, and of course a lot of them were put down the mines, and actually they were conscripted to go down the mines. Having said that, obviously if you're working on the land, you could avoid it because you're farm working. But again, an awful lot of people chose to ignore that and did join up anyway. I don't think it was terribly easy to dodge it, to be honest. But obviously, I think if you're really, really determined and you want to kind of, alter.
But how many men were missing, as it were, in 1944?
God, I don't know.
Because I think there. I read. I can't remember where I read this, but there were basically 1 million men unaccounted for in 1944.
Oh no, but this is Carlo D'Este's big argument. That actually Britain was saying it had a manpower crisis and it didn't, because there were 90 3 battalions still in England that weren't doing anything. And there was this brilliant academic piece which just absolutely hung Carlo D'Este up to dry, because he just went through every single thing saying why his figures were false, why he was wrong, why he completely misunderstood what he was reading,
right,
etc., etc. And actually, there was a manpower crisis by the summer of 1944, and I have to dig out that article,
but not the one he thinks it was.
No,
I'm going to go away and find out, because I have got somewhere on one of the bookshelves in this house, I think I've got a book called Deserter, because there was a book published 5 or 6 years ago about this, about
lots of people deserted.
Well, not just about that, about people who never turned up, and then people who did desert and all that sort of thing. I mean, famously,
yeah. I mean, also
course,
you could just avoid your conscription, just disappear.
Well, because that's the thing. Spike Milligan didn't turn up for ages, according to his memoirs, which I'm now, haven't we talked about the other day? And I'm what I want to do. Another subject I want to talk about. I want to talk about combat fatigue and the way they develop techniques for that, and his experience. Oh, you've got them all there. His experience and the way he describes the incident where he can't cope anymore is absolutely amazing. And the chapter after that, where he describes his experience of being unable to stop crying and being removed from the line and then taken care of, is brilliant. And anyway, that's for another time. That's all we've got time for this week. Remember to keep your questions coming in via Twitter, please, using the hashtag WeHaveWays, or for the elderly, by email to wehavewayspodcast@gmail.com.
And please do subscribe if you haven't done so already. And leave us a rating and a review. Catch you next time.
Thanks very much. See you next time, everyone. Cheerio.